60,000 years ago, in a cave in what is now northern Iraq, a group of human beings buried one of their own. They did not just dig a hole and leave him there. They gathered flowers. Wild hyacinths, groundsel, ephedra. They arranged those flowers around the body of their dead companion with deliberate, careful hands. Not for decoration. Not out of habit. But because something in them, something deep, ancient, and completely human, believed that the dead man was going somewhere, and that he deserved to arrive with beauty. Those flowers are how we know. Archaeologists found the pollen at Shanidar Cave, pressed into the soil 60,000 years deep. And the discovery cracked open one of the most profound questions in all of human history. How long have we been reaching towards something we cannot see? How long have we sensed that this world of rivers and storms and shadows and silence, is not all there is? The answer, it turns out, is longer than civilization, longer than language, longer than any scripture ever written or any prophet ever born. The answer is, always. And the story of that ancient, aching, universal human reach towards something greater, something sacred, something alive in the dark, is the story we are about to tell. Stay with us. Assalamu Alaikum, and welcome back to Echoes of Islamic History TV. Today we uncover another captivating story. To help us grow, subscribe, comment, like the video, and let's grow this channel together. Let's begin. Picture a world with no cities, no roads, no books, no borders, no calendars telling you what year it is or how much time you have left. Picture a world where the night is completely, absolutely dark, where the darkness beyond your fire is not just the absence of light but the presence of everything you do not understand. Where the sky above you is not a backdrop but a ceiling that moves and roars and sometimes splits open with white fire. Where the ground beneath your feet shakes without warning. Where the river you depend on for your life can rise in a single night and swallow the place where your children sleep. This was the world of the first human beings. Not mythological beings. Not distant ancestors from a storybook. Human beings with the same brain we carry today. The same capacity for love, for loss, for wonder, for terror. The same nervous system that floods with adrenaline when something in the dark moves. They were us. 100,000 years before us. But us. And the question that defined their lives, the question that drove everything they did from the moment they were born to the moment they died, was a question we still have not fully answered. What is out there? Not in the scientific sense. Not as a matter of physics or biology. But in the deepest, most personal sense, a conscious being can mean those words. What is watching? What is listening? What is the thing that breathes in the silence after the thunder? We call the earliest human attempt to answer that question by a single word. A word pulled from the Latin language, from the root anima, which means soul breath, the animating force of life. We call it animism. And to understand it, truly understand it, not as a curiosity but as a window into the architecture of the human soul itself, we need to go back. All the way back. To the beginning of the story. Imagine you are standing at the edge of a forest at dusk. You have nothing with you. No tools you did not make yourself. No knowledge you did not inherit from someone standing next to you. No writing to consult. No number to call. No tradition of accumulated scientific understanding to explain what you are seeing. The sun is going down. The birds go quiet first, then everything else, until the only sound is the wind in the trees and the distant low suggestion of water. And then you hear it. A sound from inside the forest. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just a sound. A shift. A breath. Something that is not the wind and is not you. What does your mind do in that moment? Think carefully. Think honestly. Your mind does not say probably nothing. Your mind does not run a calm probability calculation and conclude low risk, carry on. Your mind says something is there. Something deliberate. Something that knows you are here too. That response, that instant involuntary interpretation of an unknown stimulus as an intentional agent, is not a primitive mistake. It is one of the most sophisticated and finely calibrated survival mechanisms in the entire animal kingdom. Neuroscientists today call it hyperactive agency detection. It is the tendency of the human brain to err on the side of finding persons and things rather than things and persons, because in the ancestral environment, the cost of incorrectly assuming a tiger is just the wind is extinction, while the cost of incorrectly assuming the wind is a tiger is only a moment of fear. Our ancestors who survived and passed on their genes were the ones who heard something in the dark and thought something is there. Every one of us is descended from the people who were afraid first and rational second. And when those people looked at a world filled with forces they could not control or explain, lightning, flood, drought, disease, death, they did what their minds were built to do. They found persons in them. The lightning was not a meteorological event. It was a being with a temper. The flood was not a hydrological consequence. It was a presence with an agenda. The drought was not a climate pattern. It was a mood, a punishment, a withdrawal of favor. And if these forces were beings, if they were persons with intentions and emotions and the capacity to respond, then there was something you could do. You could not control a mindless force of nature. But you could talk to a person. You could appeal to them. You could offer them something. You could change their mind. This was not stupidity. This was the first and most important cognitive leap in human religious history. And the man who gave it its proper name and its proper dignity was a British scholar named Edward Burnett Tylor. In 1871, Tylor published a book called Primitive Culture that would change the academic study of religion permanently. He had spent years collecting ethnographic records from cultures across every inhabited continent, from the Amazon to Siberia, from Australia to the American plains to the island chains of the Pacific, and he had found the same pattern everywhere. Not similar. Not parallel. The same. In every culture he studied, without exception, human beings had arrived at the belief that the world is populated by spiritual beings. That rivers have souls. That trees carry presences. That the dead continue to exist. That the invisible world is as real as the visible one, and infinitely more powerful. Tylor called this animism. And he made a claim that was radical for his time and has not been seriously challenged since. Animism is the minimum definition of religion itself. It is the floor, the foundation, the common ground beneath every faith the human race has ever built. 34 years later, in 1905, a scholar named Edward Clodd took Tylor's vast systematic work and did something different with it. He told the story of it. He wrote a book called Animism, The Seed of Religion, and where Tylor was comprehensive and analytical, Clodd was vivid and human. He wanted us to feel what it was like to be one of those early human beings standing in the dark with nothing but their own mind to make sense of the universe. Together, these two books give us the most complete picture we have of how religion began. Not the religion of any particular tradition. Not Islam or Christianity or Buddhism or any named faith. The raw, original human impulse that all of those traditions eventually grew from. And for us, here on Echoes of Islamic History, that story matters in a very specific way. Because Islam teaches us something about human nature that gives the story of animism an entirely different meaning than most people realize. But we will get to that. First, we need to go deeper into the story itself. Before you can believe in a god, you first have to believe in a soul. This sounds obvious when you say it out loud, but the implications are enormous. The soul is the foundational unit of all animistic thought. Before you can say the river is alive, you need a concept of what alive means at a level deeper than the physical. You need the idea that a living thing carries something inside it, something invisible, something that is not the flesh and not the breath and not the heartbeat, but something that makes all of those things possible. Something that can, under certain circumstances, exist separately from the body. Where did that idea come from? Not from philosophy. Not from theology. Not from revelation. It came from three experiences that every single human being who has ever lived has had. Experiences so ordinary they barely seem worth mentioning. And yet, when you look at them through the eyes of someone with no scientific framework to interpret them, they become some of the most profound and disorienting experiences imaginable. The first is the dream. Close your eyes and think about what a dream actually is. You lie down. You close your eyes. Your body stays exactly where it is. Your companion or your child watching over you could confirm that you have not moved. And yet you go somewhere else entirely. You speak to people. You travel. You experience events with as much vividness and emotional weight as anything that happens while you are awake. And sometimes, this is the part that matters most, the people you meet in your dream are dead. The woman who died 3 years ago is sitting across from you. She looks exactly as she did in life. She speaks to you. She tells you something. And when you wake up, the emotional weight of that encounter is real. The grief, the warmth, the warning she gave you, all of it happened. Not in the world of the body, but somewhere. If you have never heard of REM sleep, of the brain's capacity to construct experience from stored memories during periods of neural consolidation, then there is exactly one conclusion available to you from this evidence. Part of you left your body while you were sleeping. A second self. A traveling self. A soul. And those dead people you met? They must have souls too. They must still exist somewhere. Because you just spoke to them. Tylor traced the language of the soul across dozens of cultures that had developed their beliefs entirely independently, and he found the same word doing the same double duty in language after language. The Algonquin peoples of North America called a man's soul his Otachuk, which also means his shadow. The Quiche language of Central America uses a single word, Natub, for both shadow and soul. The Arawak of South America have one word, Weja, that means shadow, soul, and image all at once. The Abipones of Paraguay use local to mean shadow, soul, echo, and image simultaneously. The Zulus use Tunzi for shadow, spirit, and ghost, the same word, the same concept. Continent after continent. Language after language. Culture that never spoke to culture. The same conclusion. And the conclusion makes profound sense once you see it. Because the shadow is genuinely one of the strangest things in the visible world. It follows you everywhere. It mimics your every movement with perfect fidelity. It exists alongside you, always, but you cannot touch it, cannot feel it, cannot reach it. And when the light goes, it disappears, not destroyed, just gone. Waiting to return when conditions are right. If you are trying to explain the concept of a soul, a double of the self that is always present but not quite material, that can vanish and return, that exists alongside the body but is not the body, then the shadow is the most perfect illustration in the entire natural world. Add to this the reflection. The face that looks back at you from the surface of still water. Your face. Your expression. But located somewhere else. Inside the water. Unreachable. Looking at you with your own eyes from a world you cannot enter. In many animistic traditions, the reflection was considered genuinely dangerous. You were looking at your own soul externalized, and to shatter that surface, to break the reflection, was a form of spiritual violence. We still say, without thinking about what it means, that breaking a mirror brings 7 years of bad luck. We are still carrying that theology. 3,000 years later. In cultures that have never heard of animism. So now you have the soul. The invisible double. The part of a person that can travel in dreams, that is visible as the shadow and the reflection, and that does not obviously die when the body dies. And now the question becomes, if I have a soul, does the tree? Does the river? Does the storm? Once you have the concept of the soul, animism follows inevitably. Because the soul does not stay theoretical. It has consequences. It reshapes the entire relationship between the human community and the natural world. If the river has a soul, then the river is a being. And beings have moods. Beings have preferences. Beings have the capacity to be pleased, and the capacity to be insulted. The river that flooded and destroyed your village last season was not a random hydrological event. It was a reaction. Something you did, or failed to do, angered it. And that means the flooding was not outside your control. It was a response. And responses can be influenced. This is the moment where the fear and the hope become inseparable. Because the same logic that creates the terror also creates the possibility of relief. If the drought is an expression of a spirit's displeasure, then there is something you can do. You can apologize. You can offer something. You can change your behavior. You have agency in a world that was otherwise completely beyond your control. Clodd catalogues what he calls the terrors that filled the daily world of early tribal peoples with unflinching honesty. The lightning flash and the thunderclap. The clouds that rolled along majestically or broke into ragged clusters in ways that seemed deliberate, purposeful, almost theatrical. The wind that moaned through swaying branches in a voice that sounded, in the dark, unsettlingly close to speech. The earthquake that swallowed man and beast without warning and without preference. The young and the old, the virtuous and the wicked, taken without distinction. The volcanic fire. The tumbling, treacherous seas and the swift engulfing rivers. These were not background elements. These were the dominant realities of existence. And the human mind, the same mind we carry today, with the same capacity for pattern recognition and the same need for coherent narrative, could not simply accept that these things happened for no reason. Meaningless, purposeless catastrophe is psychologically unbearable in a way that even terrible purpose is not. A drought sent by an angry spirit is frightening, but it is negotiable. A drought that simply happens for no reason, that could strike anyone at any time without pattern or cause, that is madness. That is a universe without structure. And the human brain is not built to live in that universe. So they found structure. They found purpose. They found persons behind the forces. And here is where we encounter one of the most difficult truths in this entire story. Because finding persons behind the forces led, over long centuries, to some of the darkest chapters in human experience. Clodd documents cases where the logic of animism pushed communities toward practices that caused immense suffering. If the spirit that controls the harvest requires appeasement, and ordinary offerings are not enough, then something more costly must be offered. Among the Queensland tribes of Australia, historical records describe young girls being sacrificed at certain gatherings to propitiate a divine force, not out of cruelty but out of desperate, terrified logic. The offering had to match the stakes. The stakes were survival. And so the price paid was the highest price conceivable. These communities were not evil. They were reasoning carefully within the framework available to them. And the framework, without guidance to correct it, led them somewhere devastating. This is the first great tragedy of animism. It was born from one of the most noble impulses in human nature, the desire to understand, to find meaning, to maintain some relationship with the powers that governed existence. And it expressed itself over and over, through a fear so deep and so total that it sometimes consumed the very people it was meant to protect. But there is another dimension to the animistic world that we cannot overlook. Because alongside the fear was something else. Something warmer. Something that, when you encounter it in the historical record, stops you cold. There was wonder. Walk into an old forest, really old, the kind with trees 3 or 4 times the height of a person, with roots that have been reaching down into the earth for centuries, and pay attention to what happens to your nervous system. Even today. Even with everything we know. Something in you quiets. Something in you becomes aware, in a way that is difficult to articulate but impossible to dismiss, that you are in the presence of something that has been here longer than you, and will be here after you are gone. Early human beings felt that. They felt it more acutely and more completely than we do, because they had no conceptual framework to explain it away. A tree is alive. Visibly, undeniably alive. It grows and it dies and it sheds and it regrows. In a world where early humans could not build anything that came close to the height of a great tree, these structures were the tallest things in existence. Some of them outlived every human being in a given community by generations, standing watch over the births and deaths of people who came and went while the tree remained. They carried a permanence that human life emphatically lacked. And they made sounds. The creak of a trunk in still air. The whisper of leaves when there is no wind. The hollow knock of a dead branch falling at midnight with nothing to explain it. In a world where the echo of your own voice bouncing back from a hillside had no natural explanation, the voice of the tree was not metaphor. It was literal. Something was speaking. Clodd documents how the echo itself was a profound source of spirit belief. You call out. Something answers. Not you, the sound of your voice comes back from somewhere else, from inside the hill or the forest or the cliff face. And the only available explanation, in the absence of physics, is that something over there heard you and spoke back. Something in the rock. Something in the tree. Something that inhabits the spaces between the solid surfaces of the world and sends messages back. This belief was not a local quirk of one tribal culture in one corner of the globe. It was everywhere. In ancient Rome, the sacred groves called Luci were maintained with the same institutional seriousness that Rome brought to everything else. No tree in a lucus could be felled without formal ritual permission from the spirit that inhabited the grove. The word lucus itself, sacred grove, defines the space not by its physical characteristics but by its spiritual inhabitant. The grove is what it is because something lives there that demands to be treated with respect. In Celtic Britain and Gaul, in the islands and forests of what would become England and France, the Druids, who held the highest spiritual authority in Celtic society, conducted every one of their most sacred ceremonies inside oak forests. The oak was their primary sacred object, and it was not chosen arbitrarily. The oak tree has a paradoxical relationship with lightning. It is struck by lightning more often than almost any other tree in European forests, and it sometimes survives. This made the oak simultaneously the most dangerous and the most powerful tree in the Celtic spiritual imagination. It was the point of contact between the sky and the earth. the place where the above and the below met and spoke to each other. In India, Clodd cites the census of 1901, which recorded widespread tree worship across the entire subcontinent, not as a historical curiosity from some ancient era but as a living practice among tens of millions of people. Women wrapped thread around the trunks of banyan trees. Offerings were left at the roots. Certain trees were known to house spirits that could grant or withhold fertility, that could send sickness or take it away. And today, right now in the 21st century, you can walk through rural India and find trees wrapped in cloth and garlanded with flowers. These are not nostalgic performances. They are the continuation, unbroken, of a practice that is older than written history. Tylor found something even more striking in the Chota Nagpur region of India. There, sacred groves served as the dwelling place of powers so ancient and so elemental that no one in the community could give them a name. They had no iconography, no mythology, no stories. They were simply presences, something charged, something demanding, something that required acknowledgement before you entered and gratitude after you left. Tylor identifies these nameless presences as survivals of the very earliest stage of animistic belief, the stage that predates even the naming of spirits, the stage where the divine has not yet been given a face or a history. Just a location. Just a weight. Just the sense that something here is different from the empty world outside. And alongside the trees, there was the earth itself. Not as a setting. Not as a backdrop. As a character. As the most important character. Of all the spiritual figures that animism produced across the entire span of human history, none was more universal, more deeply embedded, or more enduring than the Earth Mother. Not a mother who lived on the earth. Not a mother who ruled the earth. The earth herself, personified, as mother. Among the Aztecs she was Tonantzin, our mother. Among the Peruvian peoples she was Mama Coca, Mother Sea, associated with water, fertility, and the act of sustaining life. Among the Greeks she was Demeter, the goddess of grain and harvest, whose grief at the abduction of her daughter Persephone caused the entire world to go cold and barren each year, the seasons themselves as an expression of a mother's mourning. Among the Romans she was the Bona Dea, the good goddess, associated with healing and the fertility of the soil. Among the Anglo-Saxons she was simply called men's mother. Not the mother of a tribe or a clan. The mother of human beings. All of them. Different names. Different stories. Different artistic traditions separated by oceans and centuries and language barriers that meant these cultures never spoke to each other. The same essential figure. Clodd makes an observation here that is historically remarkable. He notes that in Western Europe, the veneration of the Earth Mother was so deeply embedded in the spiritual landscape that when Christianity arrived, the devotion to the Virgin Mary, who was, after all, a mother with extraordinary spiritual power, slipped naturally into the devotional spaces that had been left open by the Bona Dea and her predecessors. He documents cases in France where churches were deliberately built on the precise locations of Earth Mother temples, on the same sacred ground. The theology changed. The location stayed the same. The human need that both addressed never went away. This is not a theological point. It is a historical one. And it tells us something important about how deep these patterns go. About how persistent certain human needs are. About how the forms change while the hunger remains. Go back 17,000 years. You are in southwestern France. You are crawling through a narrow stone passage in the dark, a small lamp of burning animal fat your only light. The passage is so narrow that you have to turn sideways, and the stone is cold against your back and your chest as you move. You are going further into the earth. Further from the entrance where people live. Further from the fire and the voices and the smell of food. You come out into a chamber. And there on the walls, in the flickering light that barely illuminates them, are horses. Bison. Deer. Aurochs. Bears. Drawn with an accuracy and a vitality that will make people who see them 17,000 years later catch their breath. These are the paintings of Lascaux, in the Dordogne Valley of France. They are among the most direct and undeniable evidence we have of early human spiritual life. And the question they force on us is simple and enormous. Why here? Why did someone crawl through that passage, in the cold and the dark, to paint animals on a wall where almost no one would ever see them? Why spend the hours and the skill and the physical effort to create these images in the deepest, most inaccessible parts of a cave system, far from the parts where people actually lived? The answer that archaeologists and anthropologists have converged on, after more than a century of study, is that these were not decorations. They were ritual objects. Instruments of spiritual purpose. To paint the animal was to engage with the animal's spirit before the hunt. To capture something of its essence. To make a communication with the being whose life you were about to take, whose cooperation you needed, whose power you were asking to receive. Because in an animistic worldview, you do not simply take from the natural world. You negotiate with it. Clodd documents that in many North American tribal traditions, the hunter who killed a bear, the most spiritually significant of all animals in many of these cultures, was required to perform specific rituals of apology and gratitude over the body afterward. He would address the bear directly. He would explain why this had to happen. He would thank the bear for giving its life. And he would make promises about how the body would be used and how the spirit would be honored. This was not performance. This was genuine theological belief. The bear was a person. Not the same kind of person as a human being, but a person nonetheless. A being with a soul. A being whose death mattered in the unseen accounting of the world. And to take that life without acknowledgement was to disturb something in the order of things that would come back around. Tylor extended this understanding into what he called Totemism, one of the most widespread and most culturally significant expressions of animistic belief in human history. Totemism is the identification of a human clan or community with a particular animal or natural phenomenon. Not as a symbol. As a spiritual ancestor. As a member of the family. Among the Ojibwe peoples of the Great Lakes region of North America, clan identity was entirely determined by animal totems. You were born into the bear clan or the crane clan or the fish clan or the eagle clan. And your obligations to other members of your clan, your responsibilities, your loyalties, your marriage prohibitions, were understood through the lens of your shared spiritual ancestor. The bear was not your clan's mascot. The bear was your family. Its life was sacred for the same reason your sister's life was sacred. To kill your totem animal was not just a cultural infraction. It was a severing of the most fundamental bond in the cosmos. It was fratricide, extended into the non-human world. And that extension, that refusal to draw a hard line between the human community and the community of living things, is one of the most striking features of animistic thought. The world was not divided into persons and things. Everything with the appearance of life or power was potentially a person. And persons had to be treated as such. If the living world was full of spirits, the world of the dead was even more populated. Perhaps the most powerful and most universal expression of animism across human history was not the worship of nature at all. It was the belief in the continued existence, continued agency, and continued involvement of the dead. Ancestor worship, the ritual honoring and care of the spirits of deceased family members, is documented in virtually every culture that archaeologists and anthropologists have studied. Ancient China. Ancient Rome. Ancient Egypt. Across sub-Saharan Africa. Across Polynesia. Across the Americas from the northern tundra to the southern tip of Patagonia. Across Southeast Asia. Across Oceania. It is the single most consistently documented religious practice in the entire archaeological record. And the reason is the same reason that all of animism exists. It is logically required. If the dream establishes that part of the self can travel independently of the body, then death is not an obvious ending. Death is simply the permanent departure of the part that used to come back. The body stops. But the traveler, the shadow, the double, the soul, may continue somewhere else. And the dead appeared in dreams. Everyone experienced this. You buried your mother at the hillside in the dry season. And 3 months later she came to you in the night and spoke. Her voice was exactly as you remembered. Her face was exactly as you remembered. She warned you about something, or she told you she was well, or she asked for something that she needed. The body was in the ground. But she was real. She was there. You spoke to her. This was not interpreted as the grieving brain constructing comfort narratives from stored memories. It was understood as a visit. A real visit. A communication from someone who still existed, still had a perspective, still cared about what happened to the people she had left behind. And if she still existed and still cared, then she still had needs. Tylor documented the practice of grave goods across a range of cultures, so wide it could fill several books on its own. The Tasmanians buried spears with their dead, so that they could defend themselves in the next world. Communities in Greenland buried kayaks, bows, arrows, and hunting tools alongside the deceased, so that they could continue to provide for themselves wherever they were going. The Sioux buried musical instruments. The Iroquois buried paints, so that the dead could arrive in the other world properly adorned. The Aztecs buried a water vessel with the body, to sustain the deceased on the long journey to Mictlan, the land of the dead. In every case, the logic is the same. The dead are going somewhere. They will need things when they get there. We love them. We owe them. We will provide. But Clodd adds something to this picture that is important and sobering. The relationship with the dead was not only one of love and obligation. It was also one of fear. The spirit of a dead person, particularly someone who had died violently, or in anger, or with unfinished business, was understood across culture after culture as a potential danger to the living. Not just an absence to be mourned. An active force that could harm, if not properly managed. Among the Zulus, there was a specific belief about the moment of death. At the instant a person died, their shadow, their tunzi, their soul, became vulnerable in a way that required immediate protective action. The wrong conditions at the moment of death could mean the soul was seized by a malevolent force and turned against the very family it had loved in life. This is why funeral rites were, and remain, among the most elaborate, most carefully observed, and most emotionally charged ceremonies in virtually every human culture. The funeral is not merely grief. It is communication. It is negotiation. The living community is doing what needs to be done to release the newly dead properly, to settle the account, to send them on their way without leaving them with reasons to return in anger. The ritual words had to be spoken. The body had to be treated correctly. The grave goods had to be right. The mourning had to follow the proper form. Because if any of it was wrong, if any of the obligations were left unmet, the dead might not rest. And the restless dead were among the most feared entities in the animistic cosmos. We are still doing this. We still feel the weight of obligation to the dead. We still feel that leaving flowers at a grave matters, not just emotionally, but somehow actually concretely, in a way we would struggle to fully explain. The theology is mostly gone. The feeling remains. In a world where spirits were everywhere, in the trees, in the rivers, in the bodies of the sick, in the dreams of the sleeping, in the anger of the dead, someone needed to know how to navigate all of it. Someone needed to be the bridge between the visible world and the invisible one. Someone who could see what ordinary people could not see. Who could go where ordinary people could not go. Who could speak on behalf of the living community to the powers that governed its fate. That person was the shaman. The word comes from the Tungus language of Siberia, where the shamanic tradition was first systematically documented by outside researchers, and anthropologists eventually adopted it as the universal term for this role. But the role itself appeared independently across Siberia, across North America, across South America, across large parts of Africa and Southeast Asia and the islands of the Pacific. Always recognizable. Always performing the same essential function. Always carrying the same enormous weight. The shaman was not chosen by community consensus. The shaman was not trained at an institution. The shaman was called. Usually against their will. Usually through an experience of such shattering intensity that the community around them could see, even from the outside, that something irreversible had happened. Clodd and Tylor both document the pattern. The future shaman falls seriously ill, so ill that they seem to be dying. Or they have a visionary experience so overwhelming that they become unreachable for days at a time. Or they disappear into isolation in the wilderness and return weeks later, thin and shaken and fundamentally different. And through that experience of being broken down to nothing, through the near dissolution of the ordinary self, something new was built in them. A capacity for perception that ordinary consciousness does not have. A window between the worlds that most people cannot see through. The central concept of shamanic healing, documented consistently across cultures that had no contact with each other, was something called soul retrieval. The idea was this: illness is not primarily a physical phenomenon. Or rather, physical illness is a symptom of a deeper spiritual one. The soul of the sick person has been lost or stolen, or has wandered away in distress and cannot find its way back. The body continues to exist, but it is incomplete. It is a house without its inhabitant. The shaman's task was to go and find it. To enter the spirit world, through the induced altered state that the drum created, through fasting, through darkness, through the use of plant medicines in some traditions, and to navigate that world's terrain. To locate the missing soul. To negotiate for it, or to fight for it, or to simply find it and guide it home. And then to return, and to restore the patient to wholeness. This concept of soul retrieval appears in Siberia, in North America, in South America, in parts of sub-Saharan Africa, in Southeast Asia, in Oceania. It is one of the most widely distributed spiritual practices in the entire span of human history. And it follows directly, necessarily, from the animistic soul theory. If the soul can wander in dreams, it can become lost. If it can travel, it can be captured. And if it can be captured, someone has to be able to go and get it back. The shaman's tools were consistent across these independent traditions in ways that are genuinely astonishing. The drum, whose rhythmic beating at a specific tempo was the primary technology for inducing the altered state. The ceremonial costume, made from the materials of the spirit world, feathers, bones, shells, animal hides, that transformed the shaman's physical appearance into something between the human and the non-human. The period of fasting and isolation before a healing ceremony, to clear the ordinary perceptions and open the ones that mattered. The total darkness that removed the distractions of the visible world. These were not random props. They were a coherent technology, developed through generations of practice, for achieving a specific and consistently reproducible result, the crossing of the boundary between the ordinary world and the spirit world, and the return with something that could heal. Whether that spirit world was what the shaman believed it to be is a theological question we will leave to one side. What is not in question is that the shaman's role was real, was essential, was carefully bounded and respected within every community that had one. And the need that the shaman met, the need for a trusted intermediary between the human community and the forces that governed its fate, has never fully disappeared from human life. It has just taken different forms. Animism did not stay in one place. It evolved. Over thousands of years, something happened to the unnamed presences in the sacred groves and the spirits of the rivers and the ancestors who visited in dreams. They began to acquire personalities. They received names. They were given histories, and those histories included families, rivalries, loves, and grudges. They began to interact with each other, to form hierarchies, to compete for influence and domain. They became gods. This transition, from animistic spirit to named deity, is one of the most significant developments in all of human religious history. And it followed a logic that, once you understand it, feels almost inevitable. In the beginning, as Tylor observed, the spirit of a particular river was simply that. The spirit of this river. It did not have a name. It did not have a mythology. It did not know the spirit of another river or have a relationship with the spirit of the mountain nearby. It was simply a presence, local and specific and essentially anonymous. But human communities grew larger. They came into contact with each other and with each other's spiritual systems. Spirits with similar attributes began to be recognized as the same spirit, or to be merged. The most powerful and most vivid forces of nature, the ones that most dramatically affected human survival, were elevated above the smaller, more local presences. And the storm, which could arrive without warning and destroy an entire season of work in a single hour, became a storm god. With a face. With a name. With a personality that was recognizably modeled on the storm itself. Fierce, unpredictable, jealous of respect, capable of both terrible destruction and life-giving rain. Tylor found the thunder being mythology documented among the Caribs of the Caribbean, the tribal peoples of Brazil, the islanders of the Harvey Islands in the Pacific, the Karen peoples of Myanmar, the Bechuanas and the Basutos of southern Africa. A great flapping or flashing creature in the sky, the animistic response to the terror of lightning, given flesh and narrative. Zeus. Thor. Indra. The African Shango. Different names, different stories, same deep root. The sun became, in virtually every agricultural civilization that the world has ever produced, the supreme deity. Because the sun was the supreme fact of agricultural existence. Its rising and setting determined the rhythms of daily life. Its seasonal journey north and south determined planting and harvest, abundance and scarcity, life and death. Ra in Egypt. Apollo in Greece. Amaterasu in Japan. Inti among the Incas. The same logic, reaching the same conclusion, across every agricultural culture that developed independently. And the earth, that original mother, became the great earth goddess. With temples. With priests. With elaborate ritual cycles tied to the agricultural year. Demeter, Isis, Inanna, Pachamama. The names multiplied. The stories grew more elaborate. But the original animistic intuition that gave birth to all of them never changed. The earth is alive. It gives and it withholds. And we are entirely dependent on its generosity. Clodd makes a point here that is worth dwelling on. He observes that even the most theologically sophisticated ancient religions retain their animistic layer directly beneath the surface. In the Hindu tradition, for instance, the supreme divine principle Parameshvar, the highest God, is understood to be so exalted, so utterly beyond the petty concerns of daily human life, that the ordinary person simply does not pray to the highest God. The ordinary person prays to the local spirits, the goddess of the specific disease that has entered the household, the protector deity of the crossroads at the edge of the village, the spirit of the particular well that provides the family's water. The great theology is there. The philosophers have built it high and beautiful. But the daily spiritual life of the ordinary person is still animism. Still the local, specific, nameable presence. Still the negotiation with the forces that govern the particular life being lived. Now we arrive at the question that this channel exists to ask. The question that gives everything we have discussed tonight an entirely different dimension. What does Islam say about all of this? Not as a matter of historical judgment. Not as a verdict on the people who practiced animism across those thousands of years of human history. But as a matter of what Islamic teaching tells us about the human being, about the nature of the soul, about the origin of the religious impulse, about what it means that the search for the divine began so early and spread so wide. Islam teaches the concept of Fitrah. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, in a hadith recorded in both Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, that every child is born upon the Fitrah. Then his parents make him a Jew, or a Christian, or a Zoroastrian. The Fitrah is the original disposition, the factory setting of the human soul, the orientation that Allah installed in the human being at the moment of creation, before language, before culture, before parents, before scripture, toward the acknowledgement of a creator, toward monotheism, toward the recognition that this existence was made by something greater than itself. This is not an external instruction layered onto a neutral creature. This is the creature's deepest nature, the most foundational truth about what the human being is. And now hold that understanding up against the story we have been telling. Animism was not random. It was not the product of confusion or stupidity or some peculiar defect in the ancient mind. It was the human being in every corner of the world in every era, without any prophetic guidance to shape the impulse, looking at the world around them and arriving at the same conclusion. Something is here. Something is alive in this. Something made this, and it is greater than me, and I need to be in right relationship with it. That is the Fitrah. Working exactly as it was designed to work. Reaching toward the divine. Straining toward the transcendent. Refusing to accept that the universe is simply dead matter moving through meaningless time. The Fitrah is why animism was universal. Because the Fitrah is universal. Because every human being who has ever lived was born with the same orientation, the same hunger, the same whisper of recognition that says this cannot be all there is. The tragedy of animism is not that the impulse was wrong. The impulse was exactly right. The tragedy is what happened to that impulse without revelation to guide it. Because without revelation, without the word of the one who made the human being and who therefore knows what the human being is reaching for, that correct impulse attached itself to the wrong objects. The hunger for God became the worship of everything except God. The desire to submit to something greater became submission to trees, and rivers, and storms, and shadows, and the bones of dead ancestors. The longing for the sacred was real, and it was deep, and it was true. But without a guide, it had nowhere to land except on the most visible, most powerful, most dramatically present forces in the immediate world. This is what the Quran is describing when it tells the story of Ibrahim, peace be upon him. Ibrahim is presented in Surah Al-An'am as someone working through the animistic question, not from outside it, but from inside it, with all the seriousness and all the urgency of someone whose Fitrah is firing at full strength. He looks at a star and considers it. This might be my Lord, he thinks. The most brilliant point in the night sky. But when the star sets, he recognizes that whatever his Lord is, it cannot be something that disappears. The star is not it. He looks at the moon. Vast and luminous. The light that makes the dark bearable. This might be my Lord. But the moon too sets. The moon too has a limit. Whatever is beyond this world does not have limits. He looks at the sun. The sun that governs everything. The sun that the entire living world depends on. He says, this is my Lord, it is the greatest. And the sun sets. And he says, my people, I am free from what you associate with Allah. I have turned my face toward He who created the heavens and the earth, inclining toward truth, and I am not of those who associate others with Allah. This is the Fitrah completing its journey. The animistic impulse, the correct, genuine, God-given recognition that something greater exists, being guided past the phenomena to the one who made the phenomena. Not the star. Not the moon. Not the sun. The one who made all three, and who does not set, and who does not depend on anything, and whose light the universe was created to reflect. The prophets did not come to abolish the animistic impulse. They came to complete it. To take the reaching, which was always real, and tell us what we were reaching for. Before we close, there is something important to notice. Something that will change how you see your own daily life, if you let it. Animism did not die. When the great religions came, when the prophets walked the earth and revelation was given and theology was built and scripture was written and the old spiritual systems were formally replaced, animism did not end. It went underground. It merged with the new systems. It persisted in folk practice, in cultural habit, in the small unconscious rituals of daily life that people perform without thinking about where they come from. Tylor called this process survival in culture. The persistence of older forms of belief and practice within newer systems, retained in their outward form after the theology that created them has been forgotten. And the survivals, once you start looking for them, are everywhere. When you throw a coin into a fountain and make a wish, you are performing an animistic ritual of offering to a water spirit. That practice would be immediately legible to any animistic community across the world, regardless of their location or their era. They would know exactly what you were doing and why. When you knock on wood to avoid bad luck, you are almost certainly performing a vestigial version of an ancient practice of appealing to the spirit of the wood, a practice documented in pre-Christian Celtic and Germanic European cultures, where the oak tree was the primary sacred object and knocking on its trunk was a way of invoking its protection. When you say bless you after someone sneezes, you are performing a protective gesture with roots in the animistic belief that the violent expulsion of air during a sneeze momentarily displaced the soul and left the body briefly vulnerable to spiritual intrusion. The blessing was protection against that vulnerability. And when you leave flowers at a grave, when you feel in a way that goes beyond sentiment, that this matters, that this is not just symbolism but something actually important, you are doing something that human beings have been doing for 60,000 years. Since before recorded history. Since Neanderthals carried wildflowers to the caves of their dead. These things survive not because we are superstitious, but because they connect to something genuine in us. Something that Islam does not contradict but clarifies. Because Islam does not say the world is dead matter. Islam says the entire creation glorifies Allah. Every tree, every river, every stone, every creature. The Quran says there is not a thing except that it glorifies His praise, but you do not understand their glorification. The animist heard the tree and sensed a presence there. They were not wrong to sense a presence. They were wrong about what the presence was. The river has no soul of its own that can be pleased or angered. But the river's existence, its movement, its provision of life, its carving of the landscape across millennia, is a continuous act of glorification of the one who created it. The river is a sign. Not a god. A sign. The early animist was touching the edge of a truth. They had their hand on the door. They could feel the warmth coming through it. But without revelation, they could not open it. The prophets came to open the door. And the entire story of animism, this vast, universal, ancient, deeply human story of the first religion the world ever had, is the story of humanity standing outside that door for tens of thousands of years, feeling the warmth and knocking. We started in a cave in northern Iraq, 60,000 years ago. A group of human beings, kneeling in the dark, arranging flowers around the body of someone they loved. We do not know what they believed, in precise theological terms. We do not know what words they said, or what rituals they performed, or what picture they had of where the dead were going. We have only the pollen. Only the flowers. But the flowers are enough. The flowers tell us everything that matters. They tell us that for as long as there have been human beings, there has been a refusal to accept that the dead are simply gone. A refusal to accept that love ends with the body. A refusal to accept that this world, for all its beauty and all its terror, is all there is. That refusal is the Fitrah. It is not something the human being invented. It is something the human being was given, before birth, before language, before any of us had a word for it. The orientation toward the transcendent. The pull toward the sacred. The knowing beneath all the noise of the material world, that something made this, and that something is not finished with us yet. Animism was the first answer the human race gave to that knowing. It was not the right answer. It pointed at the signs instead of the one who placed the signs. It personified the phenomena instead of recognizing the one beyond the phenomena. It worshipped the creation instead of the creator. But the knowing itself, the original inarticulate human certainty that there is more, was never wrong. The prophets came from Adam to Ibrahim to Musa to Isa to our beloved Prophet Muhammad. Peace and blessings be upon them all, to give that knowing its proper object. To say, yes, you are right. There is more. And here is what the more is. Not the tree. Not the river. Not the storm. Not the shadow of your ancestor's hand on the cave wall. The one who made the tree. The one who made the river. The one who commands the storm and wrote the shadow and shaped the hand that made it. The one who is closer to you than your jugular vein. The one who was there in the cave in northern Iraq 60,000 years ago, when those hands arranged those flowers in the dark, and who saw in that gesture, in that reaching towards something unseen, the first trembling expression of what he had already placed inside them. That is the story of animism. That is the story of the Fitrah. And that, in the end, is the story of us. Thank you for watching. If you learned something, give this video a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and share it with someone who'd enjoy it too. Tell us in the comments what lesson stood out to you, and which story you'd love us to cover next.